If your eyes feel tired by the end of the day, if reading small print has gotten harder than it used to be, or if you've noticed your night vision isn't quite what it was even just a few years ago, stay with me for the next 25 minutes or so, because I want to tell you about a fruit that's been quietly studied for its effects on eye health for decades, one that very few doctors take the time to properly explain, and once you understand exactly what it does and exactly what it doesn't do, you'll have a real, honest tool to add to how you're taking care of your vision going forward, the kind of tool that actually holds up under real scientific scrutiny rather than falling apart the moment you ask a genuine question about it. I'm Dr. Hale Thorne, and I've spent more than 30 years practicing medicine. And across those decades, eye health has come up in conversation with my patients far more often than people might expect, because vision changes are simply one of the most universal experiences of getting older, something almost nobody escapes entirely, regardless of how carefully they've taken care of themselves in every other respect. And I'll be honest with you, my own eyes aren't what they were 30 years ago either. Reading glasses have become a permanent fixture on my desk, in my car, by my bed, scattered everywhere because I inevitably need a pair wherever I happen to be. The running joke in my own household at this point, so this isn't me lecturing you from some untouchable place. It's two people who both understand exactly what it feels like to hold a menu a little further away than we used to, squinting just slightly before finally giving in and asking the waiter to read the specials out loud. Before we get into it, I want to ask you something. Down in the comments, tell me what changes you've noticed in your own vision over the past few years. Whether that's needing more light to read, struggling more with night driving, or anything else you've noticed shifting. Even small things you've half written off as nothing worth mentioning. I read every single comment that comes in on these videos, and it genuinely shapes what I cover going forward, so don't hold back. Let me start with something important, and I want to be completely honest with you about this right from the beginning, because I respect you too much to oversell anything. No fruit, no food, nothing you eat is going to regenerate damaged eye tissue or restore lost vision overnight. If you've heard claims like that anywhere online from a well-meaning neighbor, anywhere at all, I want you to be skeptical of them, because that simply isn't how the human eye works, and anyone telling you otherwise is either misinformed themselves or, frankly, trying to sell you something, the kind of promise that preys specifically on people who are frightened about losing their vision and desperately hoping for an easy answer. What I'm going to tell you about today is genuinely powerful, genuinely backed by real research, but it works the way nearly everything meaningful in medicine works, slowly, consistently, over months and years, supporting the health of tissue you already have rather than magically rebuilding tissue that's already been lost, the same honest, unglamorous truth that applies to almost everything worthwhile we've ever discussed in any of these videos. With that said, let's talk about blueberries, because I genuinely believe they deserve far more credit than they typically get when it comes to long-term eye health. Blueberries are remarkably rich in compounds called anthocyanins, the deep purple pigments that give them their color, along with smaller but still meaningful amounts of lutein and zeaxanthin, two compounds that are particularly concentrated in a part of your eye called the macula, the small central area of your retina responsible for your sharpest, most detailed vision, the kind you rely on for reading, for recognizing faces clearly, for threading a needle or reading a prescription label. Let me explain why these specific compounds matter so much as we age. Your eyes, more than almost any other part of your body, are constantly exposed to light, and that constant exposure generates what we call oxidative stress, a kind of slow, cumulative wear and tear at the cellular level, similar in some ways to how metal slowly rusts when it's repeatedly exposed to moisture over years. An unavoidable consequence of simply using the organ for its intended purpose every single day of your life. Lutein and zeaxanthin act somewhat like a pair of internal sunglasses for your macula, filtering out particularly damaging high-energy blue light before it reaches the most delicate tissue, while anthocyanins support healthy blood flow to the tiny vessels that nourish your retina, vessels so small and so delicate that even minor improvements in circulation can make a meaningful difference over time, the same way a small, consistent improvement compounds into something significant when given enough years to work. None of this regenerates anything that's already been lost, but it genuinely supports and protects what you currently have, slowing the kind of gradual decline that affects nearly everyone's vision to some degree as the decades go by. The same gradual decline that, left completely unsupported, tends to progress somewhat faster than it does when the underlying tissue has access to exactly the nutrients it was designed to use. Let me tell you about a patient of mine, a man named Harold, 72 years old. a retired accountant who'd always taken tremendous pride in his sharp eyesight, joking for years that he was the only one in his bridge club who never needed to squint at the cards, often the one who ended up reading the fine print on the takeout menu whenever the group ordered in for their Thursday night game. When his eye doctor mentioned early signs of macular changes at a routine exam, signs that weren't yet causing him any real symptoms, but were worth monitoring closely, Harold came to me somewhat anxious, asking what, if anything, he could actually do beyond simply waiting and hoping for the best. The kind of helpless feeling that comes with being told something is happening inside your own body that you have very little ability to actually see or feel for yourself. We talked through his overall diet, and it turned out, like a lot of men his generation, he ate plenty of meat and potatoes, but very little in the way of colorful fruits and vegetables, blueberries included, simply because that's how he'd always eaten, and nobody had ever specifically suggested otherwise, a habit built over decades that nobody had ever really questioned in any serious way. We worked together on adding a small daily serving of blueberries, along with a few other colorful foods rich in similar compounds, leafy greens, sweet potatoes, the kind of foods that tend to be naturally rich in exactly the nutrients his eyes could use more of. At his follow-up exam roughly a year later, his eye doctor noted that things had remained stable, no further progression, which for a condition that often does slowly progress over time was itself a genuinely encouraging outcome. The kind of news that genuinely changed how Harold felt walking out of that appointment compared to the anxious version of himself who'd first come to see me. Harold told me he couldn't say for certain it was the blueberries specifically, and I told him honestly, neither could I with complete certainty. That's simply not how nutrition research works in a single individual case. But he'd made a small, sustainable change that was supported by real research, and a year of stability is nothing to dismiss, especially for a condition that, left entirely unaddressed, so often moves in the opposite direction. Now, a quick pause here, because if you've made it this far in the video, you're clearly someone who takes your own eye health seriously, and that already puts you ahead of a lot of people who simply wait until something feels wrong before paying any attention to it at all, treating their vision as something they'll deal with later rather than something worth protecting proactively. Go ahead and tap that like button if this has been useful so far. It genuinely helps this information reach more people thinking seriously about protecting their vision long term. And let me know in the comments, do you already eat blueberries regularly? Or is this something new you might try adding in? I read every single comment every time, and it's genuinely encouraging to see how many of you are already paying closer attention to this than you might have a year or two ago. Let me give you some practical guidance on actually incorporating this, because understanding the research means little without a real plan. A reasonable target is somewhere around half a cup to a full cup of blueberries, a few times a week, fresh when they're in season and reasonably priced, frozen the rest of the year, which honestly retain most of their beneficial compounds remarkably well and are often more affordable besides, sitting in your freezer ready whenever you need them without worrying about spoilage the way fresh berries sometimes do. Some of my patients enjoy them simply as a snack on their own, a small bowl in the afternoon instead of reaching for something less beneficial. Others add them to oatmeal in the morning, blend them into a smoothie, or even toss a small handful into a salad for a bit of natural sweetness alongside the greens. There's no need to eat enormous quantities. Consistency over months and years matters enormously more than any single large serving, the same principle that applies to almost everything we've discussed in other videos about long-term health, small sustainable habits winning out over dramatic short-lived efforts every single time. I also want to mention something about combining blueberries with other eye-supportive foods, because nutrients tend to work together rather than in isolation. Much the way a balanced meal does far more for your overall health than any single ingredient working alone, no matter how beneficial that ingredient happens to be. Leafy greens like spinach and kale are particularly rich in lutein and zeaxanthin themselves, even more concentrated than blueberries in some cases, and pairing a handful of either with your blueberries, perhaps in a simple smoothie, gives your eyes a broader range of support than any single food working alone could provide on its own. Eggs are another food worth mentioning here, since the yolk specifically contains meaningful amounts of these same protective compounds in a form your body absorbs quite efficiently, which is exactly why I generally don't recommend my patients avoid egg yolks the way some outdated advice from decades ago used to suggest, advice that, frankly, did more harm than good for an entire generation that grew up believing the yolk itself was something to fear rather than something genuinely beneficial in moderate amounts. Orange and yellow vegetables, carrots, sweet potatoes, butternut squash round out this picture nicely too, contributing their own beneficial compounds that work alongside everything else we've discussed. the kind of colorful plate that, taken together, does far more for long-term eye health than any single food item ever could in isolation. I think it's also worth addressing the title of this video directly, because I know some of you came here specifically because of the suggestion that vision could simply return overnight, and I want to make sure that expectation gets corrected clearly rather than left hanging unaddressed, because I think you deserve the truth more than you deserve a comfortable story. If you're experiencing a sudden change in vision, sudden blurriness, sudden vision loss, flashes of light, a curtain-like shadow across part of your visual field, that is not something to address with diet. That's something requiring immediate medical attention. The kind of symptom that genuinely cannot wait for an appointment next week, let alone wait on dietary changes that work over months. The kind of emergency where minutes and hours genuinely matter for preserving as much vision as possible. Diet and lifestyle changes like the ones we're discussing today are about long-term support and prevention, slowing decline and protecting what you have, not emergency intervention for sudden symptoms. And I want that distinction to be completely clear before we go any further, because confusing the two could genuinely cost someone precious time during exactly the kind of emergency where time is everything. I also want to mention something about regular eye exams, because no amount of beneficial fruit replaces the value of actually having your eyes professionally examined on a regular basis, particularly after 60, when conditions like macular degeneration, glaucoma, and cataracts become significantly more common. And many of these conditions develop quite slowly and quite silently in their early stages, without symptoms obvious enough for you to notice on your own until meaningful changes have already occurred. The kind of slow drift that the eye itself simply isn't equipped to alert you to on its own, since one eye often quietly compensates for early changes in the other without you ever noticing anything has shifted at all. An annual eye exam, or more frequently, if your eye doctor recommends it based on your specific risk factors, family history, diabetes, or anything else that might elevate your particular risk, catches changes early when intervention tends to be far more effective, which is exactly the kind of early detection that diet alone simply cannot provide on its own. No matter how many blueberries are involved, no matter how carefully you've followed everything we've discussed today. There's another piece of this worth mentioning, and that's protecting your eyes from excessive sun exposure throughout your life, something that compounds with everything we've already discussed about oxidative stress, the two working together over decades rather than operating as entirely separate concerns. A good pair of sunglasses that genuinely blocks UV light, not just darkened lenses that look the part without actually filtering harmful rays, the kind you can pick up at any gas station counter without ever knowing whether they're doing anything beyond simply dimming the glare, worn consistently during bright outdoor activity, gardening, walking, sitting on the porch in the afternoon sun, watching a grandchild's soccer game from the sidelines on a bright Saturday morning provides another real layer of protection working alongside the nutritional support we've talked about today, all of it adding up over years into meaningfully better outcomes for the vision you have left to protect. A wide-brimmed hat adds yet another simple layer of protection on top of that, something so many of our own parents and grandparents wore as a matter of course, long before anyone had specifically studied why it actually mattered for eye health. I want to circle back to something important before we close because I think it matters more than almost anything else in this entire video. The goal here isn't perfection, and it certainly isn't panic. It's simply adding one more genuinely useful tool to how you're taking care of yourself, alongside regular eye exams, sun protection, and everything else your own eye doctor might specifically recommend for your particular situation. None of it requiring dramatic effort, all of it adding up quietly in the background over years. Blueberries aren't a cure for anything. And I never want to suggest otherwise to you, no matter how appealing that promise might sound in a video title designed specifically to catch your attention. But they're a real, research-supported, completely accessible way to support the long-term health of eyes you'll be relying on for many more years of reading, of watching grandchildren grow, of seeing the world clearly for as long as possible, which is, frankly, a far more honest and far more achievable goal than any overnight miracle could ever actually deliver. So here's what I want you to take away from today. Add a small, regular serving of blueberries into your week, 2 or 3 times if that's realistic for you, alongside the leafy greens and other colorful foods we talked about. And think of it as one piece of a much larger picture that includes your regular eye exams and good sun protection habits. None of this happens overnight, and anyone telling you it does isn't being honest with you, but consistency over months and years genuinely matters. The same patient, unglamorous consistency that helped Harold's eyes stay stable over the following year. The kind of quiet, steady effort that rarely makes for an exciting headline but genuinely makes a difference where it counts. Before you go, think of someone in your life who's mentioned their vision changing as they've gotten older, a spouse, a sibling, a close friend, and send them this video, along with the honest version of this information, rather than whatever exaggerated version might have originally caught their attention somewhere online. Sometimes the most valuable thing we can give someone we love is accurate information delivered with care, rather than an empty promise that sets them up for disappointment when an overnight miracle inevitably fails to materialize. And if you want to know the specific eye exam questions I recommend every single one of my patients over 60 bring to their next appointment, the ones that catch changes, most doctors don't always think to mention proactively. That's exactly what I'm covering in the next video, so don't miss it. This video is intended for general educational information based on clinical experience and published research, and it is not a substitute for an actual eye exam or a conversation with your own doctor or ophthalmologist who can properly evaluate your specific vision and eye health far better than I ever could from all the way over here through a screen, without ever having looked directly into your own eyes. If you're experiencing any sudden vision changes, please seek medical attention promptly rather than waiting. Take good care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next one.